at the end of a movie event, your dad, approached me and says, "Hey," and I didn't know him. I said, "Hey, I want to chat with you because I really like what you're doing. I like your energy about it." And we got to chat, and he said, "I'm starting a program for veterans, or at least first responders." And that's how I joined in 2015. And I've been learning so much, and I keep learning. And I believe for us being in this position as professionals, um, at least I can only speak for myself, is when I'm there, I'm available, I share my, experience, whatever it is that I can share with them, but I'm also very open to receiving. And I feel that natural connection between from human to human. And that's, I believe, how we all grow and how we all get the opportunity to get to a better place together. It's not just me, sharing something one way. I think especially on this side of being, as a professional here, it's an incredible wealth of all goodness to work with people. When our heart beats, it sends off, well, most people know that, an electrical signal. That's what we measure on an ECG in a hospital. But with electricity, there's also magnetism. This is physics. And so we have a very strong electromagnetic field in and around our bodies, but also outside of our bodies. We can easily measure it up to 3 feet around the body. So if that field is not in a orderly state, it is very hard for the main organs in the body to align. And we often talk, with heart coherence, we talk about the heart, the brain, the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the hormonal system. And if they do not function properly, are not well aligned, then we respond in ways that is not even appropriate. And people who have experienced traumatic events or events that triggered that system even more so, it's very challenging. But it's challenging for all of us at the moment in this field. And therefore, we can learn. And I often compare it with surfing. I love to surf. I love to, go out on the big waves, and then, uh, around Hawaii. And then people say, "Dirk, be careful because, the waves are dangerous. They can kill you." And I say, "I know they can kill us. However, if we learn to surf, then it's also fun. And then it becomes actually beautiful and you're one with nature. And people who surf, they love that feeling. And we as humans, I see the electromagnetic field around the planet as also as an ocean, and we can learn to surf the waves of the electromagnetic field. And I believe that is, in my own personal way I explain it, that is what heart coherence is about. And this is how we can get to the next step in life, whether we have sustained trauma or not. And this is how we also can communicate with one another in a different way. And the more coherent we are, and we can dive deeper into that, but the more coherent our system functions, the more we are aligned with life.
I think there's this temptation to think of energy as like pseudoscience, like that's what the establishment, maybe, if you will, has been kind of shoving down our throats for so long. And, even though it's based on, ancient wisdom of healing and that we've used for since the beginning of time. But something that I found really interesting, I'm a more cognitive person, so I'm a thinker, intellectualizer. So it's harder for me to like get into my body and into my heart. So I need like evidence and I need facts and I need science. And so something that I really liked about HeartMath is they have a whole HeartMath Institute, and they have this study that they did of tons of studies, but there was this one study, and I know you know which one I'm talking about. And it was measuring, like Dirk was just talking about earlier, about the field and this thing that maybe some people are like, oh, that's pseudoscience. But they actually measured what happens when a group of people get together and they create coherence, through breathing strategies, intentional positive thoughts, and bringing the systems into coherence, and then that actually impacting the like electromagnetic field around them. And that is what Dirk actually does he has a business, or not a business, sorry, it's called Coherence Hotspot. And that I would love for you to speak a little bit about the science and
Yeah, but we often talk about when we do the work in here, with first responders, is that a lot of we call it healing. I don't know. I don't like to call it
Yeah.
always healing, but the biggest connection happens when we are in that coherent place, as you said. And another experiment, but we can link them together, and then maybe people have questions in the meantime, is of I'm friends with Dr. Roland McCready. He's the research director of the HeartMath Institute, and he has a big boy now, but he was a little boy back then with his dog, and they were measuring the boy's heart coherence and the dog's heart coherence. And so they did an experiment where he was buddies, of course, with his dog, and so the dog was in a room, and the boy entered the room and wasn't looking at the dog, wasn't speaking at the dog, but he just entered the room and he started feeling the love for, his pet. And they started measuring. You see the changes in the heart rhythm when he got really feeling that connection with the dog. But then the dog's heart rhythm started aligning with the rhythm of the boy. And then you say, well, these days, I think when you speak about energy, maybe even a few years ago, it was kind of, it seems a little out there, what you're saying. These days, it's way more accepted. And, if you've been working a day really hard or you had a really significant challenge, emotional challenge, you feel drained, you have less energy. So what is the difference between that energy and the energy that we talk about now?
So common sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
we have
that's
accepted that.
something so interesting. I think that the establishment, sorry, if you will, is obviously becoming like more accepting of these ideas, and I can even see it in right now. I'm taking a master's of counseling psychology through university, and years ago I experienced a traumatic loss, and I was searching for answers, and I read the Bible from start to finish. I read every spiritual book out there. I was looking for answers. And I found a lot of these strategies in kind of the new age world of like envisioning light beaming through your body and all this. And in my textbook today for school, I'm reading about these like grounding strategies that is exactly the same thing. And it's like envisioning like beautiful colors of light going in your body and grounding you to the floor. And it's like it is. I think there's some people who are still kind of old school who think that, oh, that's just new age, that's like not evidence based. But the people who are being educated right now, the people who are writing the textbooks, are fully accepting that this is research evidence based now. So that's really encouraging for me to see.
Yeah, and I see in the meantime, I see a chat coming in, we can choose to turn into whether it's negative, positive energy. And it's interesting that remark, because what makes something positive and what makes something negative? And so when you look at the world, you could think this is a really bad place. And I could see the world in a very different way. And you can have an experience which is very beautiful. And for me, it could be very triggering. So it's very personal what serves us and what doesn't serve us. But to get back to more of that experiment that you mentioned and I mentioned, is that one of the strongest electromagnetic generating places in your household is, for example, your washing machine. There has this electromotor, and it creates an incredible strong electromagnetic field. We're not aware of that so much. But with humans, the heart is generating an incredibly powerful electromagnetic field, and this is the cool part. When we have the capacity to measure it, and we measure the frequency, suddenly people start paying attention and say, "Oh, maybe it is not that wishy-washy because we can measure it. There is a frequency to it." And the cool part is, and this is what all the First Nations, around the world have been knowing for thousands of years. They talk about, their drumming, and they aligning the heartbeat of Mother Earth with their drumming and their own hearts, and that's all the same. Because if we are in a really good place, if we are what we call coherent, when the heart and the brain and the nervous system are aligning, we can measure a frequency. And that frequency is exactly the same frequency as the frequency of Mother Earth. And so now you get more of the more spiritual teachings almost, and the hardcore science. They come together and say, yeah, when we align ourselves to, when we are the best of ourselves, when we are, for example, athletes, or in your former line of work, when you are in the zone and you can produce really well, that means is that you're aligned with the field that we say. And that's the same frequency. And there's nothing crazy about it. It's like tuning forks. You know, you get one going, and if there is, if the other is the same frequency, it affects the other one, and the other one automatically goes even without touching it, because there is a resonant frequency, and that happens also between humans and the planet. And I think that is on a grand scale, you know, how life works. And if you begin to understand that, then you can fine tune into saying like, hey, but I have experienced a loss, you know, as you're saying, or whatever traumatic experience, and how can I benefit from this? And then we can say, well, maybe that frequency is really off in your body. We can measure that. We can measure the rhythm of our hearts. And that's how we help people also to align the different functionalities in their bodies, their brain and their nervous system and their hearts. And we measure that, and we develop a skill so you can feel more at ease. You respond in a more appropriate way to the situation, and you do not necessarily respond like you were back 20 years ago in whatever traumatic experience you had then. And so you are more in the present moment. And that's incredibly beneficial for people who have sustained trauma.
That's so interesting, what you were talking about with, the question, Jeff, and is that something that you can like attract negative versus positive vibrations? And it makes me think of, manifestation and the law of attraction. And there's just so much overlap, right, with all of these things that people kind of swear by. And I think this is really like the root. And that's why I think that it's such an important part of our program, because it really, there's all these ways of healing, there's all these theories, there's all these books, practices, whatever, but this is such a core root thing, and that's what's so beautiful.
Yeah, I want to get back because I saw some more comments there and some input. We cannot specifically say, hey, what is the frequency of trauma? Because it's individual, it's very, very specific. But what we can measure is that when our field is, when our energy is not in balance. And definitely to your other comment or question, when we change, when we are doing healing work, we can see the changes, we can measure that. We can literally see changes in the field. And that is the cool part of measuring it. So we can do a before and after. But before we even have some results, you are probably already saying like, hey, I feel differently. I feel calmer, I feel more present, I'm less responsive to something. And that is because that frequency has changed. And it goes hand in hand. And you're saying like, hey, I'm more cerebral, it's harder for me to get in touch with my body. But that's what we help people here as well, to learn to develop that connection, because you were talking about the books and all, reading all the books, and that's normal, you know, and the Bible, and but you also did this. And so when most of all of the ancient traditions go back to finding a deeper connection with their compass inside. And
Mhm.
we're talking today with the group of guys about that. I said it's great that we have Google Maps because we can meet each other exactly the same point. And then and the other one said like, yeah, but you know, sometimes we lose that connection with our inner compass, and it's so true, because we rely on all the gadgets and we rely on all the technology, and we forget that we are born with something innately intelligent, and we forget about when we talk about trauma.
Oh, it's so easy, and I know I can slip into that so easily, just, with the busyness of life and the necessity of like, efficiency and like, how am I going to get it all done? And you go into your head and you just kind of shut off the like intuition feeling part of you. And it's a trap that so many of us get into.
Yeah, but if you have experienced things in your life that were unexplainable, that were really hard to even grasp, then the body can stay also in that for quite a while, or if you do not do anything about it, can stay. And that's basically also when we work with people, they say there is an event that had such a high emotional charge that it will affect the system so much so that it needs a little bit of help in order to transform that again. And that's what Bessel van der Kolk, I was trained by him for a part, his book, The Body Keeps the Score. That's literally what's happening.
Yeah.
And so what happens when the emotional charge is so high, with a loss, for example, in your life, that you cannot solve it any longer with this. And you're used to using this because you're smart and you can solve problems with this. But sometimes we have to develop a different muscle, so to speak, to develop that connection. And I believe that's the message that we get from life and says, well, I have to find solutions somewhere else.
So I'm wondering, Jeff asks, the frequency of trauma and does it change with healing and therapy? And it makes me think of people saying, like, I have low energy. I feel like you would think that someone with trauma would have really low energy, although that's not always necessarily true if there's hyper arousal going on as well. But do you see so it's not so much the frequency, but is it more the coherence that changes as you heal?
Well, when we started talking about the geomagnetic field around the planet, at the moment, this field is super weak. So the magnetic north has been shifting away from Canada towards Siberia. It's very weak, and at some point it starts reversing. But the frequency in the field is very high. So the strength can be low, but the frequency can be high. You can be extremely tired and have low energy, but you can also be really activated. So these things are a little different. And so when we talk about, frequencies, some of the instrumentation that I use is to have, there is a very advanced instrument that has the photographic capacity to photograph a person's energy field. And that is very cool to see, because that's also to Jeff's question, where if you do the work, then you see that field change incredibly. But what means low energy is basically we have so much energy available every single day. Well, we renew the most energy, and everyone knows that out there when we sleep, if we have a good night's sleep, because many people don't have a good night's sleep. So we need to recharge. If we are energetic beings, we need to recharge. It's like we charge our phone all the time, but we forget how to charge ourselves, or we don't know how that works because we never got a cable and an adapter. So we never realized how to do that. So if we learn how to charge our energetic system inside and all of the organs, because everything depends on that. And the interesting part, what I always find with the whole system, what I've learned a long time ago, is that the body can either be in a fight or flight mode, or it is in a repair and maintenance mode. It cannot be like half in fight or flight and half in maintenance. It's impossible for the system. So you're either in fight or flight or you're in repair and maintenance mode. So that means even if you're a little nervous, a little stressed, a little agitated or whatever, your body is not repairing itself in that moment. There's like a switch is being flipped off for healing. And therefore, coherence is so important, because if you're fully coherent, and we measure that and we help people to accomplish that, then the body gets fully, well, this way, gets fully into a repair and maintenance mode. Now the nervous system is slowing down. Now your digestive system comes back on board. Your memory is better. Your chronic pain is diminishing, and all of these things. Because I would be a fool not to see patterns in the people that I work with. I always see the same challenges, in the physical. And I say, is that a coincidence that I always work with people with fibromyalgia, with memory loss, with chronic pain, with digestive disorders? No, of course not. There is a direct emotional component to it, because the nervous system is always in overdrive and the body says, I can't do it any longer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we should explain a little bit more about what HeartMath is. Like, for starters, it's a form
Yeah.
of biofeedback. I wonder if people are wondering, like, so what is it? Like, how do you do it? Like, what does it look like? I
Yeah.
wonder if we should give people more
Yeah, absolutely. So now we understand a little bit, let's say, the foundation
theory.
of how life works and how we are part of life, and how if I suffer trauma and I spend a lot of time with you, you can feel that. So we're in the field. It's the same as the experiment that you shared. And so if our system is not fully aligned, we're not at our best self, and we repeat old patterns. That's basically what we do. And I see that every single day. And I ask people, is that you responding or is it your program responding, the old program? And we begin to learn to recognize when the program is responding or reacting or when it's our true self. So one of the things with the HeartMath Institute has discovered is that it throws off the rhythm of our own heart, and we can measure that. And the rhythm becomes very like incoherent. That means is that the beat to beat changes in our heart rate are not very consistent, and therefore the heart gets into, sometimes it's heart arrhythmia, sometimes can be even a heart attack or some heart disease. But the interesting part is that, and that's not what we've been learning at school, is that the heart, when it beats, it generates the electricity and the magnetism, but it contains data. It's the same as there's data around the planet, and this data is being transmitted through the vagus nerve to the brain, and the brain basically receives instructions from the heart, and the brain is really good at executing exactly what it gets instructed. So now the rhythm is a little off, which means is that the data is different. The brain receives the data and says, oh, so we're not safe. And the heart says, no, we're not safe. And then the brain releases chemistry to match that, exactly that. And it pumps blood, in the artery or in the extremities. It gets the adrenaline going, the cortisol going, and you're literally preparing for action or for fight or for battle or for anxiety. And so if we, and this is what the HeartMath Institute has found, is that if you change the rhythm of your heart, you change the instruction to the brain, and the brain functions differently. And a lot of people think, yeah, the heart is more important than the brain when they understand this. I said, no, it's not, because if you believe in a God or in a creator, of course, otherwise we would be created without a brain. But if the heart is in a good coherent rhythm, then the brain is extremely helpful for being creative and creating beautiful things and building a business and doing all of these things. But if the brain is not in a good place, it gets all over the place.
It's so interesting, and it makes me think of somatic experiencing by Peter Levine, and reading his book. I think it was Waking the Tiger
Yeah.
recently, and he's talking about like the trauma response of like fight, flight, or whatever. If it was back in the day and you saw a saber-toothed tiger, your heart would start pounding, do the things that you were just saying to prepare you to do something like fight or run away. But if you don't like complete the cycle by like literally shaking out the energy, then your body doesn't complete the cycle and it doesn't process the traumatic event that happened. So is this kind of in like running in the face of that? Like you don't actually need to like physically, get the energy out. It's just changing the heart rhythm, or does it work together with somatic experiencing?
Yeah, so there's so many different as you know better than I do, even, there's so many different modalities out
Mhm.
there that we can use. But the most important thing is to understand the mechanics behind it and then the intention behind why we do it. Because people often say, and, one of you, was it Jeff, who said, I want to have, brush up my skills, or I want to understand it better. I've been learning about it. But what I see so often is that if you only know the technique and you get really good at using the technique, but you're only using it as a last resource, it's not going to work. And I often say to the people that I work with, if you want to learn martial arts, you don't go out on the street and you pick a fight with the biggest guy, because you're going to lose. So it's the same with this. You want to practice when you're actually in a good place. You want to not practice when it's just last minute thing. Oh, yeah, somebody told me, heart math taught me HeartMath, and now I'm going to use it because it's not going to work any longer. Um, but back to your question, is that the energy in the system is being stored at certain places. Certain motions, certain movements have not been completed, and I personally, because we address in our clinic here, we address all of that. We work alongside with all of them. I find a healthy balance between everything really, really helps. But the foundation of everything in our system is to get coherent, to get that nervous system activity down. And then we did that 2 weeks ago with the group here. We did the tension and trauma releasing exercises where we were in a coherent place. We allowed the body to release that tension in the body, what we call trauma. But if you look in the body, inside the body, in the chemistry, it doesn't make any distinction whether you've been on a tour in Afghanistan or someone who has been T-boned in a car accident or witnessed some brutal murder. Um, the chemistry all basically looks the same. The story is different, but the chemistry changes in the body, and that's what we work with. But I see HeartMath as the foundation. Same with the field that we live in. We need to tune ourselves. It's like tuning into a radio station in order not to hear only noise and crackling stuff, but a very beautiful signal, stereo, and it sounds beautiful. That's what we do, with heart coherence. And then you can add other modalities to that. That's how I personally have experienced it.
Yeah, and I think it works so well in our program how we start every morning with we do a check-in with Dirk, and then they'll either do therapy, psychotherapy first, like EMDR, or heart math, and then it's always followed by or just preceding um heart math. So I think that it works really well for getting people just like really tuned in the beginning of the day. So in the afternoon when we do like maybe some psychoeducation, that you're more in a place to hear it and understand it and integrate it.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize also is that, of course, we're focusing now in the air in the field of trauma, but I've been working with the highest level airline pilots, who work under pressure, and they get anxious and they feel they're not confident anymore, performing all the actions at a busy airport, or working with national level shooters, with big corporations where um, there's so much tension built up in that company and the structure and everything that people need, especially the executives, need to get back to a better place to make smarter decisions. So it's not only for people who have sustained trauma, but it's actually the foundation, again, the foundation of life to perform at a healthy level. Yeah.
So do you think that you can reset your nervous system, or is that kind of like
Well, it's kind of what I always see in everything that's available currently. It almost sounds like a bit of a sexy term these days,
yeah,
to just reset. And it would be beautiful to just press that button
yeah,
on that one device and say, I'm gonna do a reset. But as well as I do, that when we have been going through difficult times, there's not just one reset. The Bible is not a reset, heart math is not necessarily a reset. However, if you are capable of getting your own system in the best possible state, through these very conscious practices, that's the first step of making also smarter decisions, but also maybe then accessing support from a psychologist, from a therapist. Because if you're not in a good place, this is the interesting part. Again, you're either in fight or flight or you're in repair and maintenance. So now imagine sitting with a psychologist or like a therapist. You're in fight or flight. You can share whatever you want with this person and you can try to make sense of that, but the person's system is not available, it's not receptive, it's not safe. So you need every single professional uh, would be best to have the awareness, same as teachers in the classroom with kids, to first create a coherent environment, create a safe environment, coherent, and from that level then you can start doing the work. But otherwise it becomes really hard. And I think that has not people begin to realize that, but it's way more powerful than I could imagine when I did first my training a long time ago. I had to learn the importance from that.
I think it's so interesting because a lot of people who experience maybe like childhood trauma, or just or periods of like prolonged stress, they usually can't remember anything. Like
Mhm.
they weren't processing during that time, and so like that's just such a huge tell, right? We've known that for so long. So why don't we start every meeting, every class with, grounding and heart math? I don't know.
Yeah, and that not remembering is actually a beautiful thing of the body. It's the best
Right.
intelligence of the body because if you could remember that, you would go nuts. No, often that's the case. So the body, what it does, if you roll your ankle and you get a big ag on it, it sucks, it hurts, but at the same time, it protects the underlying ligaments from further damage. It's a cushion. So the body is very intelligent. It's the same. The brain changes after trauma, and that's actually a good thing
Yeah.
but it's not helpful if the brain, you go through life after the traumatic event and the brain cannot change back anymore. And this is all that we focus on. But the beautiful thing is when you create heart coherence, that signal from the heart goes to the brain. You can create also more brain coherence. So you also aid the brain. And then they work as a team. And then the hormonal system kicks in and your nervous system is part of that. And then you are in this really like high level performing and intelligent body that we all have the capacity to use it that way. Um, but often we go through life for so long that we even believe it's possible to change.
So how exactly does the brain work with the heart? Like how, I know you mentioned the vagus nerve and sending information up to the brain and the brain sending information to the body, but how, like, can you explain that connection more and why it's important? Like if this one's like pretty coherent, this one's like, but they're still off a little, is that a problem? Is that like,
Well, again, the brain, first of all, we have our senses, we have our smell, our sight, our touch, taste. And so that goes straight to the brain. And the brain, the function of the brain is to have a perception of what's happening around us, to keep us safe. That's the main function of that part of the brain. And so when we smell something that has been really, really dangerous, in the past, or could almost killed us, then the brain kicks in again and it responds again. It has that memory, but it's not helpful any longer. So what we're doing with the heart math practice is that we want to normalize that feedback loop between the heart and the brain. And the interesting part is that there is a little part in the brain, the amygdala. It stores memory combined with emotions, with all the memory around that event. And now I could be attacked by a dog when I was 3 years old, and I was really scared. I wasn't hurt badly, but it was this big dog jumping on me, and I don't make much of it. But now I'm 30, and I walk through the street, and I see a couple walking there with a big pup, and comes my way. And how the brain tries to make sense to say, dog, sidewalk, other people, goes to the amygdala, and the amygdala says, danger, danger, because this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, might not be fully on board if that's the case. And most people who have sustained trauma, this part of the brain is less active and it doesn't run it by this prefrontal cortex. And if it had the capacity to do that, the frontal cortex says, hey, we're here now in Vernon, you're safe, this is a pup, it looks harmless, and there's no response of the body needed. But with most people with trauma, this part of the brain is less in activity because it's shut down, because it tried to protect you, but it was so intense that it didn't get fully back on board again. And now we didn't have that relay. And so the brain is not fully operational. And so the more we feed the coherent information from the heart to the brain, and we keep, because we all know about neuroplasticity, this is how we change the brain back. The brain had been changed by this impact, but we change it back. And then there is a body response. And we forget is that, of course, the brain relies on the senses, but for the biggest part, the brain relies on instructions from the heart. And that produces the neurochemistry. And then we feel, sweaty hand palms or the rapid breathing or the anxiety because the brain gets the instruction. And there's nothing wrong with the brain. And that's why HeartMath Institute goes back to the more foundational part and says, let's start at the heart first, because when we change the rhythm of the heart, then the brain will follow naturally.
oh, interesting. When you're talking about the prefrontal cortex, it just, I think of ADHD, right? Because
Yeah.
ADHD is difficulties, challenges in the prefrontal cortex with organization and planning, executive functioning. And, if your prefrontal cortex is offline during, most of your childhood or your adulthood, maybe if you're, serving in the military for many years and it's just a high stress environment, then that would make sense that you could develop like ADHD symptoms, right?
I read this research from a Mexican doctor. He's famous. I forgot his name now, but he concluded that most of the ADD and ADHD symptoms are related to heart arrhythmia, a very fine heart arrhythmia, and it makes 100% sense, from what I study, because when the brain is not in a fully coherent, or sorry, the heart is not in a fully coherent rhythm, and it starts maybe fluttering a little bit, it sends information to the brain, and the brain is not fully capable of processing everything because it's fighting the danger, and therefore it cannot focus, and it's all over the place. And we have found is that we bring coherence back to the heart, is that the brain follows, and then it's a huge antidote, for ADD, ADHD, but also normalizing blood pressure. We see that a lot with people with trauma. They have elevated blood pressure. Well, what are you doing when you're, for example, we can maybe get later into a little practice if you want, but if we breathe, for example, we inhale, and when we exhale, slowly the arterial walls, the muscles relax, and the arterial walls start expanding. Well, what happens when a pipe expands? The pressure drops. So that means is that if you create coherence, you breathe slower and deeper, is that you start normalizing the blood pressure. And so there's a lot of studies done about that. But again, there is also a huge industry around that. And I won't get much into that part, but there is not necessarily for everyone a need to take high blood pressure medication if you're willing to use the beautiful instrument that we've been offered at birth.
I mean, there's so much, like even in the DSM, there's so much overlap with the symptoms of CPTSD, PTSD, ADHD, and it's all, about this executive functioning, which you're saying is directly related to the heart. And I think that's just so interesting.
Yeah, and it comes all back, and I like to keep it bringing it back to where we started, where it is the foundational part. It is the foundation of life itself. All of the animals on this planet, all the plants, everything, all life on this planet relies on this very specific heartbeat, what we can measure around the planet and us. The problem with us is humans have a brain with foresight, and that is very unique. None of the mammals have that. So we can say, what are we going to have for lunch in half an hour? Or what's going to happen tomorrow? Maybe I'm going to drop dead tomorrow, or somebody jumps on my back. An animal doesn't have that. And that's back to Peter Levine. You could be chased by whatever saber-toothed tiger, or this deer runs for its life, and then it's safe, and it shakes, it releases that, and it goes back to grazing or drinking. But it doesn't have the brain that says, but maybe that tiger is behind that tree and it wants to get me again and again and again. So I don't know if animals have trauma. Non-domesticated animals, domesticated animals probably don't have trauma. But that's the issue with the brain. We have foresight. We can plan ahead, which other
Blessing and
life.
curse.
And that's where we get out in our own way.
Yeah.
And people who have worked with me, they know that I often say that, said, is it possible for you to get out of your own way? And then you give the system the opportunity to know what it knows to do so well.
Wow, it's such interesting stuff. Um, so it's 12:51. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. We've used so much time just having a good conversation here. But we'd love to answer some questions. That's why it's beneficial to be here live.
Feel free to unmute yourself.
Mhm.
It's Jeff again here. Quick question. So, what is the actual practice itself, I guess?
Yeah, good question. And I would love to do that. Maybe check in with people first if they have questions, and then Jeff, if there's anyone else who has a question, otherwise we could do the practice. All right. So to keep it really simple, I like to keep things simple. I was CEO with American Express, you said it before, and I remember, standing there in front of, um, big audiences and delivering certain messages. And often people came up to me and they said, Dirk, you make this really complex process sound so simple. Is it that simple? And I often say, yeah, it is that simple, but we often make it so complicated. And so it's the same with heart coherence. It is not that hard. And it basically is 3 steps to keep it simple. I'm not going to use all the terminology, because there's a lot of different ways, as you know, because you've been studying that as well. The first step is to regulate your own breathing. And just pay attention as you sit online, as you sit here and I sit here. How much do you breathe actually? How much is your chest even going up and down? Do we consciously breathe? And we are often very shallow breathers. And that is also a signal to the body. If we hold our breath like there is danger, that's usually what we do. We hold our breath. So the first step is, can we breathe deeper? And all of the research, done by the Institute for over 30 years shows is that we breathe in a very slow and specific cycle, about count to 5 in, really slow, and then roll that out naturally for about 5 seconds fully. And then we start breathing in really slowly. That already start changing the rhythm of your heart. And if you would be working with us, or if you have the equipment, you can see that it changes the rhythm of your heart, your breathing. Because when you breathe in, it increases your heart rate, activating your sympathetic branch of your nervous system. When you exhale, it slows down your heart rate. So what you're naturally doing is you create what we call a heart rate variability. And the more variability we have, the more resilient our system is. That's step 1, the breathing. And we can practice it at the end. Then the second step is, and this is what neuroscience says, where the attention, where the awareness goes, is where the energy flows. So when you bring awareness to the breath flowing here through your chest, for example, that's how you literally energize your heart, and it changes the rhythm of your heart. We measure that. So as we're breathing about 5 in and really slowly out, we imagine feeling that air flow through our chest. And what we're actually doing is we bring awareness to the heart, and then that starts beating a little differently. And then a third step, which I normally don't introduce right away because it's maybe a little bit more challenging, is to change your emotional state. Basically, change your state. And I don't like to go to places where I say, hey, can you feel the love for this and that? Because sometimes that's just a bit too much. But as we sit here, as I would say family, as colleagues, as friends, and we sit here and we breathe, is it possible for me to feel the gratitude, and with you guys being here, to feel just grateful for us to be able to connect in this way? I say, yeah, of course I can feel that. And I can feel that in my breath, in my heart. I can just feel that gratitude. And what actually happens, it relaxes the entire system when we feel grateful. There's nothing to be afraid of, nothing to be careful for or whatever. We are just relaxing into this. Yes, I'm grateful. This is one of the things that I like to do for myself usually. So if we want to practice together, we can just breathe in really slowly. Basically, it looks like this. We breathe in like 1, and we exhale really slowly to 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we slowly breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we exhale for 2, 3, 4. And as I'm talking, can you continue to breathe really slowly and deeply? Just notice what happens. Don't even worry if you breathe right or wrong through your nose or not. It doesn't matter. Can you just breathe really slowly and deeper than you normally would do? And while you're doing that, is it possible for you to imagine, feel that air, feeling it flow through your chest? Just be laser focused in your chest. You can look at the screen, I can look at the camera here, but I can feel that air flow through my chest. And as I'm sitting here, I can feel just being grateful for doing this. Can you feel maybe the connection between humans online in real time here? And just feel that airflow. We're so present for a moment. This is when we give the body the opportunity, the heart the opportunity to be in a very coherent pattern. This is when coherent information flows through the vagus nerve to the brain. This is where the brain says, oh, thanks, we're safe. Okay, I release chemistry, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, releasing it into the body. And the body says, oh, I feel a little calmer. And the more you create this, the more the body, you change the chemistry in the body, and the more you create an awareness of the body. And the body likes this. And we create a new chemical loop, because the old loop has not always been very helpful, because there is an addiction to the chemical cocktail that runs through our body. And even if you feel sometimes anger while it's not even appropriate in the moment, it's not necessarily that you have to deal with the very specific anger. It's often because the body is just so used to that cycle of anger and getting all the chemistry in the body. The body, it's an addiction of the body. And now we're changing that up. We're changing the heart rhythm. And even while I'm talking, you can still focus on your breath. You can still feel that airflow. You can still say, yeah, this is actually pretty cool that we get together here and share that. That's when you create coherence. And I would recommend for people to do this, let's say in the morning, when you get up and you start the day, maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes. And then you can set the tone of the day, and you can feel and say, I'm alive. It's a blue sky here. I can breathe. And you bring some gratitude into your heart. It's huge how your performance or your levels of anxiety, change with that. And I hope that helps, Jeff, a little bit. This is what we can practice genuinely. But if we do it only when we feel that it's too late, that's not very helpful.
That's what I love about HeartMath as well, that you can do it with such a little time investment. I mean, even if you're just doing it on the fly, like when you're driving and you're just like, I'm going to do some heart-centered breathing. Like it's not do an hour of meditation every morning, which for so many people is just unrealistic. So this is so easy to
I love
do
that.
it.
And when you say the time available, I always say to people here is that we might be very different. We come from different places, and I come from a different culture. There's for sure one thing we have in common, and is that we all have 24 hours a day. And we all, and if and there's also a message to yourself. If it's not possible for us to take 5 minutes of these 24 hours, or maybe twice or three times 4 minutes or 5 minutes to do this, what is the message that you give to yourself? Basically, what you're doing then is you go to your therapist and you do the things and everything. What you're saying is that I need help outside of me. I am powerless. And that is huge. So the more you use this as an instrument that you have, the more you begin to feel confident that it works. And then the next time God forbid, you have to go to Costco and you park on the parking lot there and you think, I don't want to go in there. It's too busy. You take a moment and you do this, you'll be amazed by how you walk behind the cart, in a different state. You think, yeah, whatever, I'll get through this. So
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's also important to tell people that for some people, it's also a journey. When I first started doing heart math, it was very difficult. I felt like I wasn't doing it right, and I was really getting in my head about it. I was felt it was like difficult to even breathe. For some people, it feels hard, and then but with any practice, like it strengthens that pathway in your brain and your heart, and it gets so much easier where you can like instantly turn on joy in your heart like with a flick of a switch, and that is a beautiful thing.
yeah. And we all know that feeling because, well, I grew up in Europe and learning to drive standard. It's hard to drive, to work with the clutch. And you start, the car starts stalling and everything. But after a little while, everything becomes automatic, but it takes practice. And at some point, you can take your phone and you can shave yourself and you can steer, whatever. Don't do that. And then, but I mean, it's automatic. And that's, of course, with every skill that we're learning. And we're all familiar with that. It's hard in the beginning, but uh, it's such a benefit.
Yeah.
It's such a benefit. And it's a message to yourself like, I can do that. I do not only depend on others who help me. I think that's huge. And that's why we do that a lot. We do a lot of the things in here in the program that give us also self-empowerment.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's the most important
Yeah.
part, especially for trauma. Empowerment is the first step.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's 1:02. We have gone over by 2 minutes, so we will let everyone go. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, just feel free to reach out anytime. You can email us, just search us online, the Davidson Institute, get a hold of us, or we will just see you next in 2 weeks, I think it is, our next workshop. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adrian.